Hello there. It's day 2 of the semifinals, and we are going to look at the match between Wesley So and Hikaru Nakamura. Now this will be the first game of day 2. As you are probably aware of, Wesley So won on day 1. So Nakamura needs to find the win in day 2 to force the tiebreaks. Let's see how he gets along. And let's see this first game of the match today. E4 by Wesley. And now he's been going a lot for the slow Italian, but he goes for the Spanish this time around. Ruy Lopez. Bishop to b5. Probably expecting the Berlin from Nakamura, but I guess with Nakamura needing the win, he wanted something more interesting, and he goes for g6 here. So no Berlin. So he wants to keep his options open with black as well. c3 now by Wesley. Bishop g7, castles, and knight g to e7. This setup you see a lot, and a lot of lines for black, sort of where you try to avoid like mainline theory. You can play this even on the third move, the Kosia defense, and then go for this. And sometimes you see it when black goes for an early d6. But here, black hasn't gone d6, so he can go d5 in one move, and after kicking the bishop away, he does go d5. So very ambitious setup here by black, but not without its faults. He hasn't castled, so d5 has ambitiously opened up the center, and there's a check here. We can interpose though, but here comes another piece with tempo. Note though that long term white maybe has a weakness on d4 that black is hoping to exploit. But knight b to d2 is a nice move, because the knight might be headed to a very juicy outpost here on c5, and black has to be careful about this. Taking the pawn looks very risky. I don't think anyone would consider that really. I mean, if you take, I'm guessing just without having checked that something like this must be really dangerous. Just to mention something. Let's just briefly check it. Czechoslovakia. Yeah, this is probably a line. So Nakamura does not go for the pawn. Instead he castles. He wants to get the king out of harm's way here. And yeah, and some big checks that could have landed on the f6 square. Knight b3. But the problem is, like I mentioned, that the c5 square is very juicy, and Nakamura seems to want to avoid that with bishop g4. But having played bishop g4 after h3, this was kind of weird, because we just essentially gave white a free move, so some confusion there by Nakamura. And now Wesley gets the bishop pair, and also a weakness to work with. He plays rook e4, intending perhaps to just line up on the e file and hit this weakness. Rook a e8. And now h4. Aggressive intentions, maybe undermining the king side a little bit. Taking with the f pawn has weakened the pawn chain. You not only have 2 pawns, so it's easier to weaken the pawn chain. Knight back to f6, and Wesley takes this knight. And he does so because the knight was affecting the light squares, and we want to affect the light squares in black's camp by playing h5, using the bishop, maybe the rook. So removing a defender, important idea. h5. Nakamura decides to take. It's just a question of where you want the weakness. If you allow white to take, you have a weak pawn on g6. Very weak pawn, so he'd rather defend this pawn. This will probably be lost. Queen d3. Well, setting up here on the diagonal, for instance, knight b4 is not available because of rook g4 check, and you get mated. So first you have to defend the pawn, so rook f7 by Nakamura, a3, because now knight b4 was actually on the cards. King h8, queen e3, and a very nice game seemingly here by Wesley. d5, now he's getting a very strong pawn on e6, protects the pawn even further, and doesn't mind this pawn because it's all about this pawn here. Fantastic play by Wesley So here in the first game. brings the knight in. Look at this, like all the white pieces are super active. So very nice pawn. And he's only down a pawn here, so a minor detail about the material. It's all about this pawn, and now knight f7. Black doesn't have a choice but to capture it. If you play king here, there's going to be queen jack. Or you can just have a brief look. There's going to be queen jack, maybe queen here. We just take it, and this rook coming over to g4 is too big a threat for black to deal with. So after knight f7, he took the rook. We have some trades. And yeah, despite being down a pawn, once again it's all about this pawn, and white is obviously much better. But is it enough to win? He needs to find a way to use this pawn. So he'd like to get the queen to the g file and give a big check here. But that's difficult to achieve. So let's see what happened here. That's another game. Where were we? We're not mating. We are right about here. Yeah, sorry about that. King g7, bishop f6. Okay, so here we are. Queen f5, king g7. So Nakamura is trying to obviously hold on to the queen square and not allow a queen to land here on g8. And this actually goes on for a good bit. And the computer here gives white a huge plus, something like at this stage between +4 and +6. But the game goes on for a while. It's not easy to make progress, even though the position is seemingly completely winning. And we have some repetitions. He tries to penetrate, but there's no entry. Improves the king. So we're just gonna go a bit fast here. These parts. Queen e2. Now he goes for the a pawn, gets the a pawn. Nakamura goes for counterplay, tries to simplify a little bit on the king side. And here you can actually take this because this is hanging, so queen c4 was perhaps not the best move. We could have started to push the a pawn probably. But okay, queen g4, bishop g5, queen f3. And now we should be able to start pushing the a pawn, and this should be a winning position. It's actually plus a lot here. I think plus 14 or something. If you play a move that just keeps some checks under control. Black wants to give this check, and if you go to f1, there's going to be another check here on b1. And you kind of don't want to start running with your king, even though it's probably okay. You want to keep things a bit more simple. So a move like queen d1 here, or queen b3, just keeps a monster edge for white. But the move that Wesley So chose was queen e4, and that was not a good choice, and we had a big reaction from both guys here after queen g4, because it's clear now that it's going to be a perpetual. We can't go here, it's going to be a check, and then we go back. If we go here, it's going to be a check. This is what happened in the game. King back, queen check, king f1, queen d1. And note that we can't play here obviously because our bishop is then lost. So a threefold repetition here after queen g4, and a very lucky escape by Hikaru. So that actually gives him a chance. The next two games were drawn. So we go to the fourth game. And well, similar situation. Nakamura with the white, and he needs to win. Needs to win to force the tiebreak. But can he do it? Let's check it out. Let's check it out. Nakamura with white. And he opens with knight f3. He goes for well, sort of his online openings. Goes for the reversed King's Indian here. In some cases it's called the King's Indian attack, but here we've allowed a big center for black. So it's more like a reversed perch or something. 97, c4 now. Takes, allowing the queen trade, but Wesley does not go for that. He castles, knight c3. They both go for a piece activity here, developing the pieces, I mean. Rook b1, knight comes into d4, b3. rook b1 mainly to just get out of any tactics here on the diagonal, so you can indeed play b3, bishop g4. Wondering though what happens to the bishop f5, probably e4, although I don't like this pin a whole lot after that. But okay, knight d2, c6, the pawn was hanging here on b7. Also it's a useful move just to take control of some squares. h3, the bishop now goes back, and now we can put the knight here on e4. Since we have 3 pieces, I can go to the e4 square. Queen c7, e3, kicking the knight away. And I'm starting to like white's position here. A nice knight on e4, and the pawn structure is quite nice, and we can start active operations now on the queen side, which is what Nakamura does. b4. Wesley tries to slow him down a bit with a5, try to trade and maybe open the a file or not. Go to d8, and now he trades. Okay, so at least eliminating one pawn. And yeah, I mean, white seems to be standing quite nicely here. Nothing too drastic, but I mean, maybe some ideas of c5, and when you move the rook, you can play knight d6. We have to get this one out of the way first, maybe g4 at some stage, and try to get the d6 square. But here, Wesley gives up the bishop pair. He takes on e4, and we have bishop takes e4. Knight takes e4, perhaps slightly more accurate here, and if f5 happens as did in the game, then we can go into this d6 square maybe, which could be useful. But okay, after bishop takes e4, Nakamura took with the bishop, f5, and now c5. Clever move, hitting this knight, so black doesn't have time to take. He will lose a pawn then, and yeah, just have a horrible position, so he defends the knight. But now knight a4. And again, if you take the bishop, there's knight b6, and I get this knight with a better pawn structure. So black has to do something, either to protect, which looks kind of artificial to place the rook there, or play knight d5, which is what Wesley did. Nakamura now took and played knight b6. Okay, hitting this pawn here. Queen c6 and rook d1. And yeah, it's difficult to defend this pawn, so maybe Nakamura is getting enough here to play for the win. Knight g5. Trying to buy some squares. I mean, hitting the pawn, but Nakamura just says, okay, h4. Knight into e4. And here he played the move b5. Perhaps a move such as bishop b2 would have been good around these parts. Either here or after what he played, b5. The idea is simply to protect the first rank. Let's see what happened. He played b5. We have queen e6. And he took with the rook on d5. If you take with a knight, looks tempting, but king h8 gets out of the way. This is threatened to win the queen here, or to force a trade, so king h8 seems like a useful move. Knight f6 was also a move that could have been played. So king h8 is useful. And now if we play something like bishop a3, this is hanging. If we play c6, black just gets the pawn, so maybe bishop a3 to protect the pawn. But then all of a sudden f4 and black is starting to get active, and I'm not too happy about white's king side here. So he took with the rook, and that forces play a little bit more, but turns out it might not be all that great, because we didn't give us time to play bishop b2, which would have protected the first rank. And now rook d8 is very strong. The knight moves, a big check on d1, which is very annoying. So Nakamura tried to get play here, tried to get a pass pawn, but at the price of a piece, it's simply too much. c7, we can easily just block the pawn here, and if what happened in the game, the rook simply comes back and it's ready to win. This guy, rook a1, was a try, but a very nice tactic here, knight c5. And this means that rook a8 is actually met by taking the pawn, and we are in time to protect the rook. So Nakamura tried rook a7. but Wesley took the pawn nonetheless. And now we see this big check landing again. And this is why clearing the first rank would have been a good idea. And instead of playing for the win, again Wesley just took a repetition and took a draw, which means that match day 2 is indeed drawn. All 4 games were drawn. So Wesley wins the match. He won day 1. So a very nice win for Wesley, who now moves into the final. Well done indeed by Wesley. And yeah, we'll have to wait and see who he meets in the finals, but it will be exciting. See you then. Bye bye.